All right, welcome to Pulse to Pixels podcast. I'm Riot Pill, and today I'm joined with a dev from down under, Nicholas. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Nicholas McDonnell. As you said, from down under in Melbourne, Australia, and I recently released a game called Crabmeat. But I've been working in games for like 15 years now. This is like the 10th game I think I've worked on. I used to work at a studio called Samurai Punk, but this is my first project commercially since then.
Oh, okay. Do you want to tell us the name of your, studio that you've established? I guess it's just a solo studio, right? But give us a little info.
Yeah, at the moment it's mostly solo. But I'm operating under Searching Interactive. It's really just me. Crabmeat was a collaboration between myself and Mitchell Pasmans, who was the sound designer and composer. I collaborated with a couple other people to do some smaller jobs on the project as well, but the majority of that game was just me. And the plan is to grow it eventually and go back to having like a team. But for now, the economy as it is, it's a little hard to find funding for large projects and to bring on staff and stuff. So,
right. Okay. I finished Crab Meat. I'm kind of still processing what I experienced, and I would like to talk a little bit about it. But just to touch on, you said 15 years. So is Searching Interactive a new project? Have you been doing indie dev for a while? You said Samurai Punk?
Yeah. So 2014, if I get that right, I started a studio with Winston Tang, and we initially did like a mobile game, and that was with Samurai Punk, and then we did like 8 other projects. So the biggest thing we did at Samurai Punk, commercially, was Screen Cheat. It's the game a lot of people know.
Wait, you did Screen Cheat?
Yeah.
Oh my God. I hosted an event in China when that game launched, and it had like 30 or 40 people playing that at a bar in China when you first released it. I had no idea that was you. That's so cool, dude.
Yeah, so back then I was Neil co-founded, also me and Winston co-founded the company. We sort of split responsibilities, but then as far as actual development goes, like I was the level designer and artist. So pretty much, if you saw something, and actually I did sound design on that game too, which was wild. I don't know why they let me do that. Saw something or heard something in that game, except for the music, I did that. And then as the studio evolved, I sort of transitioned into like more of a generalist role. I like picked up programming, I picked up visual effects work. Actually, I was doing VFX on Screen Sheet as well. And just became like a generalist as I sort of switched into more of a design role, like pure design, where my goal was like, I'm not really good at writing documentation, or writing in general, actually. So I was sort of slowly teaching myself how to program so that I could do prototyping instead of making documents to pitch games to the team. And then eventually those prototypes some of those would end up being full games, and some of them would be like mechanics in games, for example. So by Rumbo First Blood in like, was that 2018 or 20? Oh my God, I have no idea when Rumbo came out.
Wait, that's you too?
That was us as well. Yeah, that was all Samurai Punk. So that was Winston's baby project, and I did all the AI on the initial version of that game. So by then I was programming. I was doing more programming than art, because like I used to be an art director, and like so Feather was the time I Screen Sheet, Feather, Screen Sheet, American Dream, the VR game where you do everything with guns except shoot people. Feather, which is the chill bird game. Rumbo First Blood.
The card game, the bird card game. I don't know.
No, we didn't make Wingspan. Wow, that would be crazy. We made Wingspan.
Okay.
Yeah. No, it's just it's kind of like Journey, except there's no story and it's more of an MMO, but there's also no mechanics. It's just meant to be like a hangout game, it's kind of like web fishing, but with less mechanics. Before that was even a thing.
Oh, okay.
At this point, it's quite old. And we did Rumbo, and then we did Justice Sucks. Trios was somewhere in there as well. It gets kind of hard because we did contract work for a while. We worked on some other games, like we did a port we took the game Florence and did the PC and Switch port of that. We did some weird stuff. We did a bunch of VR stuff, and what else after? Yeah, I guess, and then Justice Sucks ended up being a pretty big game that took about 2 years. And then Killbug was our last project as a team before we closed in 2023.
Would you say Justice Sucks was a sequel or spiritual successor to Roombo?
Yes, it absolutely was. We couldn't reuse the name for Roombo for reasons that might be obvious based on the name. We received a stern letter from a certain company, and so we had to change the name. But it's very much a sequel.
Okay, cool. I haven't played Roombo. I've had it on my list for years, but it's something I've been interested in. It just seems like such a fun concept. I like stealth action games. I like quirky, weird, obscure games, and I think that kind of checks off both boxes nicely. And I'll have to take a look at Justice Sucks. It's wild that you got that letter and then we're still able to keep the name. They're like, don't do it again.
It was arguable whether or not it could have been enforced, but I don't remember how much I'm allowed to even say. I don't really remember that much. It's been a long time. We decided it was safest not to use the name again, and then we were going with a publisher for that title, so it sort of helped. Because the publisher wanted to own more of the project. Right. So it being a spiritual sequel meant it was kind of completely separate from the other game. But obviously we were able to be it's narratively it's the same. It's the sequel. Right. He's called Dusty now instead of Roombo, but that's fine.
Yeah. And I still can't get over though Screen Cheat being you. Because my first experience with encountering you was as Searching Interactive and promoting Crabmeat, right? And we chatted a little on TikTok, and that was cool. I had no idea about your history with Samurai Punk and it being, I maybe I didn't do a deep enough dive in my prep for having you on here as a guest, but geez, dude, Screen Cheat, like I said, that was such a cool concept. And it was really fun being able to be in a position where I hosted events and stuff to have people, getting drinks together and stuff and have, it felt reminiscent of back in the day, as kids just playing GoldenEye together on the N64 over the weekend, but adults playing a modern, kind of spin on it. It was fresh and innovative and something new, and kind of played into a lot of that nostalgic feeling while, us being able to be adults and just, get a little drunk and, have that nostalgic feeling while doing something innovative. So that was really neat. But we did, as I mentioned, meet initially on TikTok, and you're here today to talk about Crabmeat, right? So how about you introduce for viewers kind of the concept of Crabmeat?
It's so hard because I'm so used to the old days when we used to do events. I used to go to America to do PAXs and stuff, and I got really good at pitching all our games. Crabmeat, I'm so fucked because, sorry, can we swear? Are we swearing on this?
Abso-fucking-lutely.
Okay, fuck yeah. Sorry, I'm Australian. It's gonna be really hard not to. Really, but yeah, we used to pitch tons of stuff, and Crabmeat is not the first game that I've done completely remote, but it's not had any sort of physical presence anywhere, and I've really not had to describe it verbally, even though it has a store page description. So I'll do my best. Crabmeat is a point-and-click survival horror game where you have to pay off your debt to the feudal state of Australia by crabbing for king crabs in the Antarctic. Yeah, and it's a short-ish, 2 to 3 hour. It can be up to 4 hours depending on how slow you are. But it's a fairly short game. It's PC only at the moment. Came out from time of recording, like what, 4 weeks ago?
Yeah, sounds about right. Yeah, we were trying to record kind of right about launch, and then just life. Yeah,
I was very tired after launch. Like the crunch just kind of caught up to me.
Oh, you and me both, man. We, just like I said, life. Okay, but you're talking about it being relatively short-ish. I mean, especially in comparison to things like what a lot of people have been talking about Crimson Desert recently, and that's large-scale open world. People talking about how they're still discovering things in it. 60 hours into the game is definitely not that. But I will say, for me personally, it didn't exactly unfold how I expected. I had been following a bit of your development. I expected horror aspects and things going in, but I mean, there are a number of narrative kind of setups, I guess, that still, it still subverted a lot of my expectations going through it. I'm curious if you designed specifically around subverting people's expectations.
I think it was an accident because I don't. To be totally honest, I don't play horror games on the reg. So I think I went into the genre. Like I've never made the same game. It's the same genre twice in a row, basically, or same like niche. I went in wanting to make a very specific experience. Like I had like a vibe in mind of this like oppressive, the real horror is the state, not the crabs. But the crabs are also scary. And the atmosphere of the world being quite peaceful in comparison with what's going on around you. And that's like kind of the high level of what I was trying to achieve. And then realizing, oh wait, fuck, people who play a lot of horror games have all these sort of like genre expectations that it kind of doesn't have, like multiple endings or having like a very extensive narrative or lots of characters, these kinds of things. Mm-hmm. Because the last horror game that I played was like Amnesia.
The first one?
Like 2000. Yeah. So I played stuff that's like spooky since then, but nothing. It's just not a real regular occurrence for me. Like a recent game that was not inspiration because I played it about 3/4 of the way through development, but it came up and it was sort of like a good comparison point to know that I was on the right path. Was Threshold. Is a sort of I don't think it's a solo dev experience, but it's a small team, and it's another game about like doing work and that being kind of scary. And and the vibes around that kind of work. In their case, obviously, they made the work, spoil like some parts of Threshold, but you're in an environment with low oxygen, and just getting oxygen is kind of like horrifying in that game. You have to chew on glass canisters.
Is that the game by Julien Yvel? Mm-hmm. Okay, I've got that on my wish list. I haven't played it, but I love the art style, similar to what you did. I guess kind of lo-fi analog horrors.
Yeah.
Maybe the best way I could describe, which I have a soft spot for that kind of aesthetic. I think there's something to be said about kind of like, the mid to late 90s, early 2000s aesthetic where, due to hardware limitations and other things that people had to kind of creatively work around that and be a little more intentional with the design, due to the way that lighting was rendered and other things. You have to soft bake models and numerous aspects that kind of gave it to use as a rendering process, I think, in modern times, gives a certain feel to it that lends itself particularly well to horror. I have a lot of love for Puppet Combo, was streaming Nun Massacre earlier this week. And I don't think I've ever been on stream, freaked out like that before. I can share you some clips of it later, but I was losing my voice after that stream. Fan off. How do we turn the fan off? You might. Stop! What are you doing? Oh, how did you not kill me? Go away, Momo. Not now. Stop! Help! Help! Why am I not dead? Help! Help! Go not now, Momo. I know. I'm worried too. Holy shit! Holy shit! Oh, how am I not dead? How am I not dead? How am I not dead? How did that happen? Help! Where do I go? No!
Yeah, I think style can really help. I don't know how many books you read, but like books don't have images, right? And they cause you to do a lot of the work in your brain.
Yeah.
Things, right? So the lower the fidelity, the more your brain has to work to fill in the gaps. And I think ultimately, like, our brain is just so much better at creating horror than we are as like designers or creators. Like, we can never sort of fill in the blanks for you in the way that's going to just tickle you just right, you know? But by creating a lower fidelity, there's more gaps for the player to fill in for themselves.
I mean, I would argue that from a cinema standpoint, some of the best horror films kind of allude to the monster. You know, it's where you don't get a monster reveal until late in the movie. I mean, a couple of movies come to mind, like The Ritual, you know, where it's maybe glimpses here and there, and then it shifts tone later in the movie. Or The Babadook, you know, where it's kind of this sense of dread, but you don't really get to, you know, see the Babadook or anything until basically the end of the film, if I'm remembering correctly. But if your mind is going into overdrive that whole time, kind of trying to identify what the threat is, what's causing this feeling, right? So if you can identify it, you can maybe, you know, your brain can work out how to potentially deal with a threat, right? But if it's unidentified and, you know, it could be anything, and that's far more terrifying, I think. So it's a really valid point. I do think that that works well in, you know, in reading as a medium, as you said, 100%. So, you know, you kind of subverting expectations is, it seems like it's partially like, you know, something that you're aware of and, you know, kind of wanted to but weren't sure how to do, and you, as you said, did a little accidentally. But you know, even the narrative, like, how did you come up with the narrative? You had a concept about, you know, what the true horrors are and stuff, and I really like that. I would like to kind of, you know, avoid any heavy spoilers this early in the conversation. But, you know, I'm curious what the writing process for the narrative worked out to be like.
Well, this is also weird because it's like my first game that I've directed with a narrative in it. Mm-hmm. So I'm used to all the games I've directed in the past, because I didn't direct every game at Samurai Punk, about half. Mine was sort of like very gameplay mechanics driven.
Yeah.
Which is probably part of why Crabmeat is so systemic and has a lot of gameplay in it, compared to the sort of core gameplay inspiration for the game, which was like Iron Lung, right? Like it's happy just that Iron Lung is a reference. Like it was part of my initial thoughts, and then eventually I just kept straying further and further away from it because the things it does are really cool, but it does so with like almost no gameplay.
Yeah.
Right. That was I guess I have played some horror games. So the narrative process was just kind of like a very specific inspiration. Right around the time I came up with the mechanics before I came up with I came up with the setting and the mechanics before I came up with the story. So I had Antarctic crabs Deadliest Catch meets Iron Lung, sort of. Actually, it wasn't even Iron Lung initially, because it was going to be. I don't know if you know the game Duskers, but the initial inspiration was a game where you're on a computer console.
Yeah.
And you're typing commands into a ship. And the idea would be you'd have security cameras and you'd be able to see the different. Because in Deadliest Catch, the TV show, it's an obvious reference for the game. There's multiple people on the ship. So the idea was you'd be like a person in a lighthouse somewhere, remote controlling the ship and giving orders to the crew.
Mm-hmm.
And you would be like, telling them, hey, fuck, there's something coming up on the, on the stern. Get inside, or avoid it, or get your weapons out or something. So it's sort of like an RTS. That was the initial inspiration. But then I started futzing around with, then it sort of transformed into a fixed camera game where it was a fixed camera perspective and it was a single character. And then I just kind of zoomed it in again and put the camera in the player's chest, which is how we got to the weird controls, because the game was initially you were directing a single human with a mouse, kind of like you would control an AI in an RTS. And that was how the inspiration, or not inspiration, the sort of the impetus for the controls, where it was mouse only, came from. Where I just taken this top-down camera and just slapped the camera on the player's chest bone and go okay, that's the game now. We'll just see if this how it works. Okay, cool. Well, I've made a lot more first-person games in the past, and I'm comfortable with first-person perspective, so I'll keep it in first person, but with this really weird restriction. So that was the mechanics, and it was always going to be crabbing. That was never out of the question. That was always part of that really initial thing. So then it was finding something to drive it. And the Australian election was around the same time. So I was wrapping up a project that never got finished. I have announced it and officially cancelled it. It's called Barrow. And that was how I transitioned onto this back in February of 2025. So this game's only been in production for about a year. And the Australian election was happening, and we have a sort of rival party, thank God, did very badly in the election. But they were the Trumps of Australia. Literally called the Trumpets of Patriots.
Wow.
I know, it's horrible brain. It's I don't really go into it too far to beyond that. It's just we had this party that was cringe. Everything they wanted to do was very anti-Australian, but also hyper-patriotic. And it kind of represented the worst parts of the country. It's very regressive. It's very reflective of Australia in the 1920s.
Right.
It was awful. And fortunately, they did very badly. But I saw a lot of branding for them around where we were traveling at the time. I think we were going on a road trip. And I was okay, I think I just need to make it a parody of these guys. What if these guys got into power and did really, really well and somehow conquered half of the South Pacific?
Right. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do want to cycle back around to 2 points, both the controls and, being based in Australia and things, but we'll come back to that in a minute. But just the overall vibe and feeling, would you say you kind of had an intended meaning? You wanted the player to walk away, with a specific feeling? Or did you want it to be more ambiguous and open to interpretation? Do you prefer clarity or ambiguity? Might be a better way to phrase the question.
Ambiguity.
Nice.
Yeah. Which is to say, I probably went into that question. Besides that, I much prefer ambiguity, and I think the game is kind of ambiguous about what it's trying to achieve.
Yeah, I'll say when I finished it, I had a number of questions that I wanted to ask you about specific things, going into this conversation. But I would argue that those questions and the thought process and feelings that came from that were directly due to the way that it was designed. And, if I had just had you there while I was playing to be able to discuss those things, I don't know if it would be as impactful for me personally, So I definitely appreciate that aspect of it. I will say, you mentioned the controls. right? It there's something to be said about older horror titles like, RE1 or something with the tank controls and adding a certain level of tension, right? Which I would argue is applicable in your game, which is, what I think you described as kind of point and click adventure or something. But to me, the movement is reminiscent of like early
Controls.
VR controls, like working around locomotion. And you said at Samurai Punk, y'all made some VR games. I'm curious if that design scheme stems from your work in VR.
Oh, no. All of it. So, funnily enough, the only VR games I've made, we made 3.
Mm-hmm.
God, fuck, I can't believe we made 3 VR games. One was completely seated. Another one was standing and seated, but you can never move.
Right.
And the other one was like a roller coaster ride. It was a contract for a government thing. It was awful. So like that was literally the worst job I've ever done in my life. In games anyway. Games are still pretty good, but that was a terrible contract. And so yeah, nothing we did in VR was ever locomotion based. I think that's, kind of bad because they were quite static experiences, but the reference for me was definitely like tank controls. So Rumbo First Blood, which you haven't played but you know of, that has tank controls, and there is like that like mechanical tension that you get in because it's a stealth action game,
right?
With tank controls, right? And you get the enemies coming up on you, and you're facing the wrong direction, and you're trying to go right, but they're coming from the left, and you're facing left, so they have to turn before you can move. Like it's just like such a really nice moment of friction for the player where they are at fault to their death usually because they just struggled with their input, not because they don't know. So I think that was the sticky bit with Crabmeat, was figuring out it's going to have this strange control scheme, which is pretty point and click is an easy way to describe it, but it's also kind of first person tank controls, and I need to make it clunky, but I can't make it it can't be my fault when the player fails, right? And I think in some places, like with the inventory, for example, potentially that is still my fault, where it's like it's not slick enough,
right?
That friction. So like it's injecting the friction in just the right place. Like reloading being like a 3-step process, like reloading the gun, and getting that right was tricky, especially because it was sort of fusing point and click and tank controls and traditional first person stuff.
Yeah.
It's not just one of those things. It's all 3 kind of simultaneously. That was kind of like a large process throughout all of development, and even up until ship. Like things were changing right to the last week, basically.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of work. I do think that you did a well job of easing the player and kind of alluding to things that will come without, kind of spoiling anything in the narrative, and we might have a little bit more spoiler heavy discussion in a little bit, so I can highlight it for people before getting into that convo if they want to play it themselves. But I think you kind of, introduce the various things going on and also hint to things to come in various aspects in a well enough way that the player's not completely overloaded at any point, but they do feel that tension of, wait, how do I do that thing again? Wait, I have to go do this or that, right? And juggling with the controls, which are not what you're used to, right? So it's like, I think it worked out exceptionally well. My only thing was I expected it to be longer than it was, and I was kind of settling in for like, okay, I'm gonna master this, and then it was like, it's over, but it was really cool. I think you did a good job kind of, balancing that. But I will say that, like I was stating, it did feel like there might be more beneath the surface, and that I, kind of expected to be a little bit more. there's kind of lore and other things going on, allusions to things. Do you think there are layers that people might not immediately notice or may notice in a subsequent playthrough? Do you prefer for people to uncover things over time?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like it's also an open world game, which means players can complete the game with not seeing everything in the game, right?
Right.
You can beeline, just do the objective, come home, wrap up the story if you want to, and you can not do that. There is some friction in the fact that some players just really struggle with the game and do things very suboptimally and then run out of time, which had to get addressed in a patch. I didn't realize how slow players could be.
Yeah.
And there are players who want the game to be infinite for some reason. But there are like a couple of layers of things to discover. But the reason the game has a limited timer and the reason the game is got like that kind of limitation placed upon it is because, there is a sort of fixed amount of stuff to do. Players will find it usually within a couple of sessions at most. And I don't want you to feel like I'm sort of promising more than I can deliver, especially for the price point. Like it's meant to be. I'm not expecting the players to play through like 5 times,
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't you say that the timer too also kind of lends itself to the narrative elements of, the kind of capitalist society? You are a cog in the, you're just a part of a bigger machine, and you must serve the state and everything, and it lends itself to the tension and other things going on. Wouldn't you say that also is a mechanic?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted players to be conscious of the timer at all times, if possible. That's why the clocks are everywhere. I don't know if you noticed, but when you can manually save in the bed instead of relying on autosaves.
Yeah.
And your character lies down, looks up, and the clock is above them, and the clock does not stop.
Yeah.
You can sleep by lying down, which is to say you can just lay and look at the clock. And I wanted you to be present. It was sort of a debate with me and the playtesters and like one of my friends who's like a designer I trust of like whether or not I should start the clock the minute the player wakes up in bed or whether or not I should start when they leave the gates. But because of the friction of the game, I decided it was best to like let players get out of the gates first. So that's a change that nearly happened right before ship that might still come in at some point. But that tension is really important to drive the player and keep them focused on their objective, and keep them from, you want them to search and you want them to explore, but you also want them to sort of try to optimize and try to like, do the job effectively. Which is kind of a weird thing to say. It's still a game, but you want them to want to do well and quick.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll say that for me personally, I did one playthrough, right? I briefly checked out the demo, and then when you launch the game, I did one full playthrough, and I did most of the things out there, right, in the open world. There were a few things I still had left to explore, but potentially some things to experience left in the game. But I felt the pressure. I probably had enough time to do it on a single run, but I worried about how much time it would take me to get back. I felt the pressure. I started pushing to kind of turn the ship around and get back. It definitely had a certain feeling to it. And the weather when you're out there, kind of in the amping up of stakes and stuff, it felt like very ominous, and the clock added to that, it's like I don't know how much time it's gonna take back, to get back there, like. Yeah. So how long, like, from, your perspective as a dev, how long did it take to kind of, from your initial concept? You did mention working on your previous game, Barrow. Would you cancel? Which do you think you'll go back to Barrow? Is that done? But no? Okay.
Yeah. So I was working on it. I started like on nights and weekends, not even really, maybe a few. I basically did like a few hours of work on the game sometime in late 2024 and a little bit at the start of 2025. Like just noodling around. I had like a grey box of a boat and the controls, basically. That's all I had. I was basically just trying to like build a boat, put a guy on it, move him around. That was all I wanted to do. Because it was like a bit of a technical experiment around the like, do I move the world and keep the boat still, or do I move the boat and keep the world still? There's always like technical things you got to try out initially. And then it was also, navigating the player on that surface at the same time and going through those iterations of, the fixed camera to switching to the first person camera. And that was a few hours of work of just like on and off little weekend experiments. And then once Barrow wrapped in March, it was in February, March 2025, I basically just kicked into gear and full time on this. I did some other ideation. I think I released like a different prototype that I was also working on that had never got released. Because I like to release prototypes if I'm not going to keep working on them, because it just helps me get a sense of like, this is done, you can play it if you want, it's shit, but like I put out Voracious Metal, which is another potential game I was going to make, but that's just on itch as well. And Barrow was in a position where I was waiting to get funding, so initially Crabmeat was just meant to be like a 3-month development process of a fun little thing to do while I wait for funding for Barrow. And as the sort of narrative that I pushed out around Barrow, because I put out like a blog explaining what happened with that project, but the funding obviously didn't come through. So development was basically, by the point that funding hadn't come through, I was like, well, Crabmeat's good enough. I should just finish it. And I should make it like a little bit more substantial so I can charge money for it. Because initially it was free, just a free thing to teach myself some skills while I wait for Barrow to come back. And then it sort of transitioned into a commercial project. So February 2025 to March 2026, it's about a year of production. Give or take, and I took October off as well. I was working on it pretty much full time the whole time, so that was the scope of it. I think I announced it in like June or July of 2025, and then pretty shortly after that released.
Nice. All right, it's been about, speaking of release, it's been about almost a full month since it released. How would you say reception to it's been? I think it's very positive on Steam. Have you had friends play it? What is the reception been like overall? How have sales been, if you don't mind my asking?
So sales have been, overall reception is better than I expected. I was going into launch with I was just kind of down on the game in general towards launch. It's very hard right at the end of production to stay positive, especially when you don't have like a team behind you, because Mitch was already working on other projects at the time as the sound designer. He was on and off the project, started sort of halfway through and then sort of just came in and out to get things done, do stuff like the trailer, that kind of things. And I was not super hopeful. The wish lists weren't very high, but it's exceeded expectations, or at least my projections, not drastically enough that it like changes any sort of planning I can do for the next game. But it's done a little bit better than I expected. Reviews are still... I was expecting complete review bombing because of the controls, which I did get to some extent. Like, most of the negative controls reviews on Steam are about the controls. But it's 91% positive, so it's still in a reasonably good position. It has enough reviews now that that's a legit score, not just like friends and family. And it got like a fair amount of traction on Twitch as well. Not a lot of YouTubers yet, but the Twitch streamers really liked it. Like KCO, I don't know how to say his name. He's played it. He had like 60,000 people watching. And it's kind of got more pickup than some of the other games I've worked on in the past, which is interesting. So that's been really cool to see people watch it and play it. And like the media, the people who kind of get it and grok it seem to really enjoy it. And overall, again, it's like I was expecting some pretty bad scores.
Right.
And it's done a little bit better than I was expecting, which is good. Coming into ship, you're very aware, especially when you've released a few games, like you become a pretty good editor of your own work, and you can say like, it's going to do this well and it's going to be reviewed this well. and it's slightly better than I expected, which is nice. So clearly the parts that resonated more than I was expecting. Like the people that enjoy it really enjoy it. I've had one or two people try to speedrun it, which is fun. Because it's open, right? There's a lot of routing options available to players.
Right.
Yeah, so it's been good. Just slowly been recovering because I had after launch directly, I think I did an update every day, trying to fix bugs and add content, very small amounts of content, fixing polishy things. Because my list I didn't get everything done by release that I wanted to get done, which is exhibited by the work that I'm doing currently. So after that sort of crunch period of updates, and it was quite a lot of work just before launch as well, I've sort of taken some time, really slowed development down, and it's I'm sort of getting into a good place again where I'm able to just work comfortably on the game and do updates before the next one comes out. So it's good.
Nice. Would you say that you've gotten kind of, having done got several releases into your belt and stuff, and talking about how you kind of set certain expectations realistically based on past experiences, do you think that you, as a creator, have gotten better at filtering through, just people putting hatred on, just trolling or, whatever, and giving actual helpful critical feedback? Because there are people that are just fuck this game, and they have 0.1 hours in the game or something. They're just jumping on a hate train. I think it's a big thing where you see people trying to, cancel a game, just because of concepts or other things that they don't like, and it becomes an echo chamber, right? People just saying the same sentiments. Have you got to a point where you're it's okay, I can filter through that and I see, where I need to improve, and maybe where it's I took creative liberties and I'm okay with accepting that maybe couldn't or shouldn't have been adjusted for this release?
Yeah, and I think I'd like to say I did a great job of adapting to that sort of hatred, but there is, it hurts every time. Even you think you're I know what people are going to hate about the game. It's all good. I'm ready for it, and you're never ready for it. But I definitely would say I'm probably more ready for it than I was with previous titles, because I've been on some projects that have been received negatively, and more negatively than this. And thankfully on those, I wasn't the sole creative, so I was, you can sort of share that feedback among other people, and you can sort of commiserate, and also just talk about strategies for solving them. But yes, it becomes easier to see through, especially if you go into a project like this where you've got a sort of experimental part of the game that is going to rub some people the wrong way. You can just filter those people out, and if they're not making a comment in good faith, and you kind of learn what a good faith piece of feedback is. I was talking about with the controls, because that is basically what we're talking about, right? There's people who just hate the controls. Fortunately, a lot smaller part of the community than I thought. There are some people who don't hate the controls; they just think they hate the controls because there's some friction hitting.
Right.
And I have been able to sort of improve things for those players, probably not fixing their experience, because once you kind of burn a player, you kind of permanently burn a player often. It's hard to get them back.
Right.
But, their feedback, they sort of accidentally mention the thing that's actually the problem, and you can improve it for the next player. And that is what we try to do with the updates for the game, is improving of them. And there's other stuff that I just, sort of oversights in design, like I mentioned, the time limit. While it's necessary, I needed to figure out a way to give people more time that fit the narrative, which I was able to do. I think I spoiled it in the update, but I won't spoil it here for people who want to experience it firsthand. But there is a way that the game handles running out of time that's more interesting than just bricking a save file.
Right. We can touch upon a little bit more spoiler heavy territory just in a little bit here, and I'll just put a disclaimer before we dive deep into some of that. But, talking about oh, maybe, there's going to be pushback with the controls and stuff, but you also, as a creator, have a certain vision. And we talk about the benefits of, the tension that can come along with a control scheme, things like that. I mean, I think that there are, that friction isn't inherently bad for a player when it's done so with an explicit intent, right? We look at, Bennett Foddy's games going all the way back to like QWOP or something, or Getting Over It, right? Or more recently, Baby Steps, right? I mean, The whole point of Getting Over It is that it's not an easy game, but it's also like in the title of the game, Getting Over It, it's like there's layers and nuances to what it means. It's not just literally getting over the mountain, but it's getting over the control scheme. What it means, philosophically to kind of get over something, and like I think that, we're Bennett Foddy to say, hey, this just doesn't feel good, like it's hard and challenging, and it's frustrating, right? I mean, a whole genre basically of rage games, right, kind of stemmed from this, right? It did well enough, like people, I don't think that it would have been impactful had it not had that friction. And it's because that friction had an intent behind it, in my personal opinion. So, I respect you for kind of going down and choosing something like this and committing to it, and then trying to, then it's trying to find a balance between tweaking things you can, but honoring that vision, right?
Yeah. I think to some extent, it's also a genre expectation, Bennett Foddy wasn't the first to do rage games. I'm thinking of Be the Guy, but that was a sort of a genre to some extent. Hard and strange games. But I think when you come into horror atmospheric stuff, people kind of expect pretty simple controls because the gameplay is often actually quite simple. Unless we're thinking about survival horror, and this isn't quite survival horror either. I guess I think to some extent I didn't quite position the game correctly in the terms from a marketing positioning perspective, where it's like a failing of me meeting the player's expectations. The players watching a trailer, for example, and saying, well, that looks cool. Not, oh, that looks like it has weird controls. It's not obviously weird, unlike we're talking about Bennett Foddy's game, Getting Over It. It's pretty obvious that the guy in the tub with the stick is gonna control a bit different to a guy with the legs.
Yeah.
In a platformer, right? And I think that's that expectation setting that I think is probably one of the biggest failings of Crabmeat, is that it's a little bit unclear what is going to be strange about it. It's not like a chain control, if someone did a Resident Evil throwback. I think Heartworm maybe is a good example. I'm not sure if that has tank controls.
Crow County, right? That has tank controls, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a few games that have done throwbacks to RE1 and 2, and they are able to the fixed camera and the they can sort of signal the reference, right? They can say they can say, oh, this is like this because it has this art style, it has fixed cameras, and you can see the character kind of spinning in place. And maybe they even use the word tank controls in the marketing material, and that means something. I think, like we said, is this is sort of, it's not a point and click, it's not a first person game, and it's not a tank control game. It's kind of all three, and that level of sort of, it's just a little bit too far off for people to sort of understand initially. It can be hard, and doesn't help the game succeed from a marketing perspective. But yeah, I stuck with my guns because it's me. I don't care. Players think there's no point. It's kind of in the studio vision. But I don't think there's a point making games. I could go do something else. And there's no point making games if you're just going to make the same games other people are making.
Right.
And for me as a designer, one of the most interesting things is just how we interact with the game and play it, the actual play part. the thing I'm most interested in. That's my background. And if I don't push some element of design in every project I work on, I'm not sort of happy. So for this, it was like easy to just be like, it's not going to change.
Right.
And I'm going to get, people are going to be angry about it. Like, there are people on Steam who would leave a review for this. Or not a review, they just come in on the forums and they say,
controls,
well, just without WASD, no buy, And I'm like, okay, that's fine by me. I didn't ask you to buy it.
Yeah.
You don't have to play it. But I think the friction there is that they want to play it, right? They look at the setting and the scene. There's something about the game that does appeal to them, clearly, because otherwise they wouldn't be there leaving that comment.
Yeah.
And I am upset for them because I'm like, I guess you come to this genre wanting these kinds of experiences. You see something with a novel setting, because I think it's a novel setting. I don't think there's a crabbing horror game otherwise. And they go, oh, this is a shame, right? But they get very, it's the level of blood pressure that they get to is the confusing part for me. I don't actually know if that answers any question, but that's where I'm coming at it from.
Coming in, one more thing to kind of highlight, talking about players' expectations and things, right? And marketing perspective. I was recently having a discussion with a buddy about how, like, Mrs. Pill, right? My wife is not particularly what I would describe as a gamer. She's played some games, right? It's not completely foreign to her or anything, but not a lot, right? She doesn't religiously play games or follow news or anything, right? And, I have, got her to check out a few games here or there, but it's always a learning thing for her, right? She was interested in The Last of Us, right? And wanted to watch the show. And I thought she'd really like the narrative in the game, right? But the first combat encounter, she screamed and threw the controller at me and was like, help, I don't want to die. Kill him for me. Go get him. And I'm like, you're playing, though. I want you to experience it, But it was like coming to grips with the camera controls and other things. And then in a moment of, the need, to act on something and the stress that came along with fighting, trying to figure out the controls were difficult for her, right? And because she hadn't been conditioned by other games, because a lot of games, right? First-person shooters, for example, right? And yours is a first-person game, right? But we've played, I have been playing FPS games for 30 some odd years or something, more than that or whatever, right? I played Half-Life on launch, I love Quake and Doom and all of this stuff. So when I sit down at an FPS game, even if there's some new mechanics, it's far less for me to figure out, right? Because the developer, expected me to know WASD is move the map, to understand how looking around in first person works and things like that, right? So there's a certain assumption from a developer's standpoint that players are going to understand this, right? And there are a lot of foreign, atypical control things introduced in this game. So, from your perspective, it's kind of aligning those expectations, communicating it to a player. And you talk about marketing, some of that's kind of stuff that you can't easily communicate to the player, at least to a potential player, right? Without them just experiencing it.
And that's why the demo is still up, actually, because I wanted players to have a chance to be like, well, it's not for me.
Right.
And instead of buying it and leaving a negative review or something, or having to refund it.
Right. Before we kind of go, there's a couple of other things I want to touch on before we go into more spoiler stuff. But one thing, actually, I don't know if I should. Okay. I'll touch on this real quick. Upon beating the game, right, and nothing about the narrative or anything, but in the credits, right, you listed, and I do want to cycle back around this more in spoilers section, which is why I was apprehensive to bring it up because it does align with some of the conversation we talked about earlier and the narrative. But you mentioned the Wurundjeri, correct my pronunciation, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the Aborigine groups in Australia, right? Can you tell me a little bit about that? And, I want to, applaud you for kind of awareness and stuff. I think that's cool. But, is this specifically relevant to you other than, living in Australia? Tell me more about this.
Yeah, so the thing that people can probably see, I'm white. I'm an Anglo-Saxon normie. Obviously, Australia was like conquered, like 300 years ago. For the background for people who don't know, and we have a pretty nasty history with the indigenous population, or what's little's left of it. And it's very sad. The current state of things are as they are, and the game's not really interested in discussing those things. So it's very common for people when they do a talk or a conference in Australia to just acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. So that acknowledgement that I have in the credits is a very standard acknowledgement. There's nothing super special about that. I am specifically calling out the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, of the people of where I live and where I worked on the game, and saying it sounds. So that's a specific call out. But for me, I just think it's important to have that there because as we sort of go on, it's easy for those things to get forgotten.
Nice. All right, thank you for sharing. And I'll have to look up more on those people. If you have any information I could share, maybe to post up in the description or something later. Be cool if people are curious about that. History is interesting, so yeah. But I think maybe we can talk a little bit about, a little bit of some more spoiler territory. So anybody watching, if you are curious about it, maybe come back and visit the video after playing it. But, I wanted to talk a little bit about the player experience and my personal kind of thoughts. Like I said, I had certain expectations that I think it kind of sets up early on in the narrative, right? That are you're working for the state now, right? You have this debt to pay off or whatever, right? You have these things, and it looks like you're going to potentially be spending a week or something there, and then it's kind of abruptly, cut off at the end. Did you ever have any intention to kind of expand the game into, a more day-by-day thing and with more management things?
So there's two things there. One, it does take place over 7 days. It's just a sort of a video game abstraction of time being very contracted to sort of fill the... And that's just not super clear to a lot of players. It's like a kind of a mistake.
Okay, because you're sleeping on the save and stuff. It's kind of the concept is that you are out there on the boat for like a week or whatever. Okay.
Yeah. That's why there's coffee and nothing else on the boat. That's why there's no food. You're just meant to do the work and then come back. That being said, there's so many design notes I have around trying to implement more of a sort of day by day schedule into the game to sort of give it that rhythm. And I think it would have been a good change to make. It's another one of those things that I have a design for it. It just would have taken some time. It would have changed some stuff. I would have had to retest a lot of stuff. It would have introduced some other problems, maybe extended development out by a few months. more than I could have afforded to extend development out by. Though I think it really would have been a benefit to the game to have a bit more schedule to the player's time. So rather than, but then time passing couldn't be this constant stream of this kind of thing where you are constantly under pressure. I think if it had a more generous time schedule, it might not have been as good for that way, but it would have given the player a way to skip time as well, which potentially could have been beneficial.
Right.
There are sort of many ways I could go into like how it could have been implemented or how I would have changed it. It's not something I'm planning on doing because it would be quite a drastic overhaul to the game. It would kind of change a lot of the flow that people have experienced so far, and I don't really want to do that now. But certainly the game is meant to take place over 7 days, and the abruptness of it ending is, well, it's just meant to be a short game. And you're meant to sort of get in, do your job, and then get out.
Right. Okay. I mean, that clears things up a lot for me because I was like, I thought, I'd go back to the place at the end and then go back out again the next day or something, and it felt more abrupt than what I was expecting as a player. Because we were supposed to record before, right? And I was kind of like, oh man, I don't know if I'm going to finish the game. And then I'm like, okay, that's done. Because I was like, if this is 1 day here, in what I did in the span of me playing, I was kind of thinking like, man, this might be like, hours and hours longer than I expected it to be. I didn't dislike, what it did or anything. I was just kind of buckling in for potentially a longer, experience, which from a development standpoint, kind of keeping it interesting and engaging, if that was the gameplay loop, might have been difficult. But going back to, we're talking about the Aboriginal people, like I was kind of thinking that the narrative is talking about potential dangers of, I guess, capitalist society, government controls, somewhat Orwellian, Big Brother is watching, Big Brother is controlling, things like that, and potential backlash from environmental, there's so many layers that could be looked into it. I'm curious, as to what, is the structure itself part of the message with the whole, being on a crab, what do you call it? A crabbing ship, I guess, and the gameplay loop that you have going on? Is that specifically intended to tie into that narrative aspect of things?
Like the fact that you're fishing, crabbing. It's a weird term for a extremely rare, ironically, you mentioned global warming. The reason it's king crabs is because there are king crabs in the southern oceans in Chile, off the coast of Chile, I think, and they're migrating to the Antarctic because of global warming. This game is not fantasy. It's just like, wait, in about 10 years they could be down there. It's because the game is set 10 years from now. But those mechanics, like it's fishing for like a completely, like no one needs to eat crabs. They're not an efficient thing to fish for in the way that we're fishing, like king crabs specifically. The ones that up in north in the Bering Sea to go get, like it's a luxury item. Mm-hmm. So I think it was very important that it was fishing for like, you're not fishing for just like cod that we're going to salt and preserve, and everyone
because you can catch fish, right? You can catch other crabs too, but you explicitly, from a mechanic standpoint, have to toss those out.
Crabs, yeah. That was very important for the narrative. It's just all meant to be part of the one thing, for you to feel oppressed.
Are there multiple endings in the game, and kind of depending on a player's interpretation, do you think that the ending could be perceived, differently for different, a different player experience?
So there's multiple paths through the game, and there's different there are not multiple endings, but you can find more stuff that sort of that helps flesh out the story along the way. But I think this is again about genre expectations, where like I realize how much people really wanted multiple endings, but I even now I don't think it would be a good idea for the game to have multiple endings, because it would defeat the purpose of the game, to have the player have a choice,
right?
Or if you had any real agency in the situation, I think it kind of defeats the game's intent. The agency you have is how much you know about what's going on, basically. How much you can sort of draw out of the scenario from just the environment and the things you find.
I mean, I walked away from it kind of feeling like I didn't know if I missed something, or if the game wanted me to feel like excuse me, and gird we trust. If the game wanted me to feel like I missed something, and I think you kind of walked the line between, giving enough breadcrumbs to allow, that description of books, the brain filling in the books. You gave enough breadcrumbs to kind of allude to a larger world and details and stuff, but there's enough mystery there to kind of allow a player's imagination to go off of that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, that was definitely the intent. I didn't have the budget to add like tons of shit to the game. I was trying to keep it constrained, like keeping everything on the boat besides those cutscenes in the game was quite tough, but It was very helpful from a keeping things constrained perspective, because it just, if I wanted to add something, it has to happen on the boat. And it meant that I didn't have to, the player, it's like you essentially get the value of a Metroidvania with backtracking and art reuse for that. Because every time I added a prop, the player's going to see it like 30 times. So it's probably a good use of time to add a prop, because it flushes out the scene a little bit more and it looks a little bit nicer, but the player's just going to see it constantly. I've worked on games that, it'll have like a level and the player will never go back to that level again. And I always hated working on art. My background's in art. I always hated working on art where the player would never see something more than once. Right. Because it felt like it was a waste of my time. Yeah. A shooter where you work on a gun and the player's going to see that gun a lot. So polishing that makes good value for time.
Yeah. As opposed to I spent 6 hours on this one, model that is in the game for 30 seconds. It's like, what the fuck did I, it makes sense for the main character model because the character is Sigurd the entire game. Hell yeah, I'm spending them. Why did I spend 6 hours on this one thing that they barely see? I get that.
Yeah, exactly. I think that influences a lot of my design choices.
Yeah. Did you always intend for things to kind of wrap up with the, the giant, insane boss fight?
No, I didn't actually. I needed justification for the ending cutscene.
Can you elaborate?
Well, so we're in full spoiler territory, right? So you get recycled at the end of the game. Like you do your job, you return the crabs get back just fine. Your catch comes back, and but you get put down. Their justification is that the crab damaged the boat. It's sort of implied that it would happen either way. And I wanted a moment of tension and success for the player right at the end. And it sort of worked out really nicely that you get this really weird emotional ending, which is very non-traditional, where there's the big moment of tension and release, and then it's quite calm for a while until you get to the end and you think you're, in the home stretch. The boss is just basically a fake out in terms of narrative anyway.
Yeah, narratively, right. Absolutely.
But it is meant to be a mechanical win for the player.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to give you this sort of moment of, power fantasy.
I mean, the stakes continue to ramp up. At the beginning, it's struggling with the controls, right? And then as you master the controls, there's threats on the boat, right? things start to amp up. There's potential mechanical failure and stuff. As you master the controls, more things for you to manage out there until it escalates to this giant fucking thing. And you're like, oh, I mastered it and I complete it, which, is contrasting the narrative elements of like, oh, I did it. Nope, gotcha. And I think that's like a really cool dichotomy, where you do, as you described, give the player this mechanical triumph, that contrasts the narrative elements. It's a very, I don't know, I guess kind of, it's impactful, it evokes, conflicting feelings in the player, which I think is really interesting from a design perspective. I think it was cool.
Yeah,
it stuck with me.
See, for a couple of minutes in the game, that was an example of a thing that I hated working on though, because it was like, oh yeah, the player's only going to see this for a really short amount of time.
Yeah.
I just kind of it's like I feel bad. But the other reason was it was nice to have a way to damage the boat in a permanent way afterwards. Yeah. So that the player is objectively, they're not forced to go back, actually. Technically, the timer is stopped. Because I don't want the player to get soft locked after that point. But because the boat is so damaged, there's no reason not to go back because the traps are gone.
Yeah.
The machinery is mostly destroyed. All you have is your engines and your driving, and you can get back. So that was sort of like a nice. It just kind of it put a lot of. It sort of solved a lot of problems, and it created this sort of interesting tension. And it was like a mechanical payoff for all the build up. And it pissed off a lot of people too, because some people hate the ending, and that's fine.
Yeah, I liked it. It's not for everyone, but I mean, like my partner, we'll watch movies and TV shows and stuff, and it's like whenever there's a quote unquote bad ending, she hates it, and I'm like, it needed to happen for the growth of the character. Or something, for there to be some stakes, for it to be interesting and there to be development, otherwise it's like, to me, something like that is important. Is everybody gonna be on board? No, but I think it adds a more interesting, nuanced meaning, to things. So, I mean, for me personally, I'm glad you went with that, and I can think that many people won't like it because it's like, what the hell? I mastered the game, and that's what I fucking got. But there's,
I was going to say, I think there's also that friction of, because it is a little bit of survival horror lineage in the game, not necessarily pure, because it's not much of a horror game with a capital H. It's much more of a survival horror. There is some element of comedy in the game. Well, the jokes are mostly for Australians and Kiwis, and those games don't often end bad for the player.
Right.
They often end in sort of like a power fantasy.
Yeah.
I've played Resident Evil 5. I've punched they escalate emotionally from underpowered to overpowered, right? Whereas this doesn't ever really do that. I guess you do sort of become a bit more powerful. This is your punching boulders, killing Wesker kind of moment, and I think there is that friction there of people going in the mechanics are telling me that the game is going to do this because that's the things that I've played in the past.
Yeah.
But then the game is not doing those things. Which again partially comes from the fact that I just don't play a lot of stuff in the genre.
Right.
My reference points are either older or they're just a bit more left field. It comes from I had just worked on an FPS And I was like, oh, I'm just not interested in doing that kind of stuff right now. I'm not interested in making a power fantasy. I want to do this other stuff. So, yeah.
Neat. All right, I think that's key points on the game that I kind of wanted to touch upon in the time I got you here for today. But I wanted to ask a couple other things just before we started, recording. You had mentioned that you also stream. Do you stream under, as Nicholas or Searching Interactive? Do you do game dev streams? Because I've had people on here who do do live development on their streams. I'd be curious, what you're streaming as a fellow streamer, what your streaming journey's like, and if you want to maybe plug yourself a little bit here.
Sure. Yeah. So I stream. I think I have streamed like games in the past. Like when Samurai Punk, we were doing streams. We were doing a mix of different streaming games. But when did I even start doing it for Searching? Oh, I have no idea. I don't know, maybe August last year? Streaming on, whenever my partner changed their work schedule and they were able to like not be in the study as often, I was like, okay, well, I got more time at home free, and I'm like working alone. It'd be nice to have some people around. So it's all dev streaming, and it's on twitch.tv/Searching Interactive. So it's just the studio name. Again, planning for the future with that. And it's just me, and I basically just do a couple of days a week. I'll do like a half day. So this morning I did like a 9 to 12 or I think I'd streamed to like 1. I was doing the gamepad support. Was finishing that off today. And that's been really good, getting found some community through there. The streams haven't been like massively successful in any sort of financial way. It's just, a couple of people get to tune in, found some testers, other chatting with other streamers, which has been nice, like other game dev streamers. And it's just nice to have company when you're working alone.
Yeah. As a solo dev, right? Yeah.
Yeah. As a solo dev on this project mostly. Again, I want to make sure I always bring up Mitch because he did some killer work on the audio. And I'd like to work with him more on the next project, but it's hard without funding.
Is the hoping more comes your way? Do you stream on a pretty consistent basis? Do you have a schedule, or is it when you're feeling like it? And do you put out videos outside of that for YouTube or anything else?
Yeah, I was pretty consistent. For a while, I was doing like 2 days a week guaranteed, and then sometimes do extra. But after launch, my schedule got all out of whack because like a mix of like burnout and then just other stuff happening, and I couldn't, working on features that I couldn't really stream, or just like recently I've been doing localization, so I've mostly been doing emailing, emailing forward through localizers, getting their feedback, adding stuff, and it's just like it's very hard to stream that kind of stuff. It's not like just I'm working on this feature for the game, and I can just buckle down and do it and then chat while I'm doing that. So that's been the schedule. It's a bit all over the place, but it's generally mornings Australian time during work hours. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, sometime in there.
Yeah,
the rough schedule.
I'd like to keep an eye out for, I just dropped you a follow. I'd like to keep an eye out. I didn't even realize, like I said before today, that you streamed, but, you talk about how, it's nice kind of predominantly being solo. I mean, a lot of solo devs do work with other people, but with your current kind of studio, it's you and then people that you work with on that project, right? It's not a core team. And so out of curiosity, you describe it as a nice way to kind of, have feedback and keep you company and other things. I mean, I would argue that it's a little bit of kind of keeping your sanity and your head on straight, so that you don't wind up just day in, day out at your computer alone without any social interaction. But how interactive are the streams? Because for me, my streams, a large part of it is, audience engagement, right? Whereas for you, as a game dev doing game dev streams, are you predominantly focused on just kind of documenting the process and giving people like live feedback with a little bit of engagement. I mean, I have reactions and, a big, effects and stuff that pop up, taking over my stream, allow people to, but, obviously you're working, you can't, like, how do you balance it, or do you predominantly just focus on kind of not necessarily involving people that much, but allowing them to watch and ask questions live?
The involvement for people has mostly been like playtesting and giving feedback, and then a lot of playtesters would hop in the stream and talk to me while I'm working on a feature that they were like passionate about or like interested in me QA or something. So I'm very chatty, but I don't think there's a lot in the terms of like more like Twitch integration, dynamic stuff. It's much more like I'm doing the work and I'm trying to talk the whole time because like I'm comfortable like talking and working at the same time. So that's sort of what I'm interested in. This is for like archiving the development process. I have also got devlogs on YouTube, which are extremely relaxed devlog style. Like they're not very produced videos. Video production is not my passion, and those are like I just basically talk like I'm on a stream, and then I just edit them down a bit. And then I try to show off like, oh, I've been working on this feature. Let me break it down. But just as much, people who watch the stream are going to get that exact same content by just asking me the questions. To some extent, I think they're educational for some people. I know there were a couple of people in the chat who are like coming in to learn, because I do have a fair amount of experience, especially in the engine. But these days there's less people using the engine, or at least less people on Twitch interested in learning it. So it's more just like, here's my process, and then talking to other people. Right.
That makes sense. Okay, so out of curiosity, right? You've been doing this for years now, right? And you stream, and this is kind of like your, I guess, second major venture, it is with Searching Interactive being Samurai Punk, the previous one. Is this your primary, job? Do you do anything else part-time, or, have another job during the week that you're doing? Yeah,
I've been pretty lucky that I've been able to do searching stuff since closing Samurai Punk. Because Samurai Punk's not actually closed. Like, me and Winston still run it. We just started working on different games in different studios. He's doing his own thing. Shout out to Acting Out if you're interested in playing it's an online multiplayer game where you're all like acting out scripts that they design, and it's you could call it friend slot, but it's not. It's just like I played it once. We were laughing within like 5 seconds of playing it, because you just when you get delivered a script that you've never seen before and you try to deliver the lines, it's very hard not to fuck them up. And it's very funny because no one can act. So he's doing his thing, I'm doing my thing. But I'm pretty lucky that I'm able to work full time. But the days of that are numbered, which is why I'm putting out games. Crabmeat's going to help extend that a little bit, but obviously it took longer. It hasn't made its money back yet, so it's took longer to make than the money it made. So I need to get some stuff out soon again. I've taught in the past, like at universities, so that's an option for me. There's obviously just normal work as well.
You taught sex education?
Yeah, sex education. No, I took game development. And I would like to stay making games full time, if I can.
Yeah.
But we got to see what the industry has in store for me.
Do you work?
Australia, we're able to find grants as well.
Yeah, that's a huge. That's pretty great. Do you work from home, or do you have an office you go into, or what?
You'll see when you get the video from this, but I work from home just in my spare room.
Nice.
We used to have an office back in the day, and I would love to have an office again, but the cost and the time, and a little bit of the time, the commute is nice, but the cost of having a small office is, even now, it just doesn't make sense. I've got to try to there's a couple of community events in Melbourne that I try to get to regularly to try and stay connected to the community, seeing old colleagues, the people I used to work with, try to work with people I used to work with if I can again. Mitch is from the old studio. He was the composer and sound designer there.
And that's who did the sound on Crabmeat, right?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
But yeah, trying to stay sane however I can.
Oh, it's tough, man. It's tough. I have very little, if any, grasp on sanity as it is, so my heart goes out to you. Fighting the tough fight. My heart goes out to you. Let's hope we can raise some awareness. Do you have any advice you'd offer to other developers out there, or people who are interested in maybe getting involved in the medium in some capacity, whether through voice acting, sound design, marketing, or anything else, since you kind of, as a smaller, dev, you kind of do a number of things. You talk about putting out videos, right? But video editing's not your passion, as you said. What advice would you offer to other people, including touching upon things like you said in Australia, being able to get grants for things like this? What comes along with that territory?
The biggest thing, I think the thing that's most applicable to everyone is try to focus, or try to enhance. People have their dream project or the thing they want to make.
Mm-hmm,
but when you scope the thing you want to do, you also need to try to shine a light on the things you're best at, that show what you're good at as a human being. Whether that's the art style that you have, or particular technical skills, or writing skills, or whatever area that is. Because that's either going to lead you to a specialized job or a game with a very particular feel and style.
Right.
Whether you're doing solo projects or you're trying to get a job in a team or something, trying to do everything, which is what I do, which is stupid, is tough. but even then, I don't do everything, right? I just choose. There are some things I choose not to do at all. I don't believe people that I just don't put these things in my game because I don't care for them at all as a designer. Right. And that's, I think, being selective and having taste is the biggest skill anyone can have, because it's kind of free to make and it lets you have more of a personal style. I mean, this is sort of an agenda thing too. I really do want games to all feel more special. Games are quite homogenous, or can be quite homogenous. And it's nice when things feel like they were made by an individual or a team with a sort of clear idea of what they wanted to make, and it just wasn't another roguelike deck builder.
Yeah.
And it's cool that they're roguelike deck builders, but man, there's a lot of them. Just again, there's tons of genres. So I want people to do the thing that they like. Because if you just follow the market, or you just follow what people on YouTube tell you to make. So basically ignore everything I just said, because don't do what anyone else says. Just do your thing and do it, focus on it. And ignore everyone else and every piece of opinion. No. There's good advice and there's bad advice. It takes a long time to learn what good advice looks like.
Right.
And then you find out that every bit of advice you ever got was biased because that person had something in their life that affected their ability to give you that advice, or for that advice to be correct for them. But that's a thing that time can only teach you. No one can tell you how to get good feedback from someone.
Right. So patience is really important. It's something you develop and hone over time.
Patience. I'm not very patient.
Okay. Yeah, me neither. Well, I'm kind of patient. I can be patient. It depends. I resonate with that, though. With grants, though, and stuff, right? Because it depends on where someone lives, what country they're a resident of, things like that. But can you talk about your experience about getting funding for the things that you cared about in Australia, and how that may be applicable to people in or outside of Australia?
Yeah, yes, depending on where you live, just take a look at what your state and federal governments offer, because you might be surprised that there are arts grants available. I live in Victoria, Australia, and we have federal grants and we have state grants, and those are both very beneficial. Punk got a lot of state grants over the time, and Barrow, the project that got cancelled, was partially funded by a state grant as well. my future project might be. Crabmeat wasn't, because it was meant to be short. I didn't really think about it for grant because it was meant to be done before I would need the money. And then it kind of ballooned down. By the time I was getting close to done, I didn't really have time to apply because it's not a quick process. You have to like plan for it a little bit. But yeah, if you have something interesting and it's made by people and it's a small team, like if most countries that have grants, you should be able to get one, whether you're in Europe or the UK or Australia. Those are the countries I can think of that definitely have stuff. I know Singapore has some stuff. I'm trying to think.
I think some European countries have some good grant options too.
Yeah, Canada is also known for its grants. But I think as someone who's received many, I think it is good to, if you're in a position where you can not get them, let other people take them. Don't apply. But also, it can be quite easy to rely on them and then become like a bad part of your process.
Right.
You're building a game not for the grant. I think that's actually more of a risk with publishers. Back when getting publisher money was a big thing, before publishers all ran out of money, we definitely were before this fate where at Summer Punk we would build a project for a publisher, not build a project because we wanted to, and then it just never got across the line because of course we weren't that passionate about it because it wasn't built for us, and then that project never came out. With grants, I think it can become a bit of a crutch in that you aren't taking, we're making art that's meant to be weird and cool.
Yeah.
But you still have to think about the market and your ability to be financially successful and to plan and budget around what's realistic. And the grants can sort of warp that a little bit.
Right. I mean, like, there's less pressure to kind of appeal to people, and you potentially make something that's not commercially viable, and it kind of ends up potentially hurting your brand, or because of less pressure to, kind of push out, a viable product, right? Because you're like, we got funding for it, at least partial funding. So we can chill on this, and I believe in it, and it might skew that a little bit, right? But there are, things to be said about pressure, right? Kind of pushing you to do things that might not be there if you're securing that funding, and having the awareness of that, I think, is a very good piece of advice on your point.
Yeah, I think you got yourself and like how your brain works. So that you don't control that thing about like pressure. For me, like I don't work better under pressure, but I make better decisions under pressure.
Under pressure,
I would say that like I definitely I'm much more likely to make a decision and stick with it if I've got I have to decide on it because I have to start working on it today because I got to get it done in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
2 weeks or something, right? But if I can waffle on something because I got a little extra time, I don't have to commit to something, and then there's the knock-on effects from not committing to things are harder. So there are some advantages to that.
Right.
But again, I'm in a pretty privileged position on this project, and just in general. So I can't speak for everyone else.
Right.
For some people, they want to make the game without the grant at all. There's no chance that they will make it, and for them, it's really just about being like, okay, you got the grant, but what's next? It's not the end; it's the start of the process.
Well, and you also talked about, what, you're just going to game the system and abuse the grant or whatever. But there are people out there that do that, right? There's notorious filmmaker Uwe Boll, right? Like his whole career's based off of just gaming the film system in Germany, right? Yeah.
I've seen the movie. I'm aware of
Yeah, and it's not like he doesn't have, knowledge and talent and stuff, but he explicitly is, that's his career, right? And I get it. It's wild, to think that it's a whole thing, but I think, for a lot of people, this is an industry that people are passionate about, and I would hope that, they can find that balance, and that work ethic that you're describing and knowing themselves, as you said. So, yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining. Is there anything else that you want to touch on before we wrap up here?
No, I think I'm all good. I mean, just like you can follow me on various places if you search for my name or for Searching Interactive. I and the studio are out there.
Yeah.
I Crabmeat.
I will link in the video description, all relevant links to social media, Twitch stream, things like that. And anybody who has any questions, feel free to comment on the video or hop in my Discord. But thank you so much, Nicholas. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I look forward to seeing what you're doing in the future. Are you working on anything right now that you want to talk about, before we sign off?